Did Jezebel mastermind political chaos, or was she a pawn in a game dominated by men? What dark secrets propelled her rise to power, and why is her name synonymous with deception and treachery? Jezebel, a Phoenician princess turned queen of Israel, was thrust into a volatile intersection of politics and religion through her strategic marriage to King Ahab. This union was not merely a personal alliance, but a significant political maneuver designed to strengthen ties between the powerful maritime civilization of Phoenicia and the influential kingdom of Israel. However, her arrival in Israel introduced more than just political connections. It brought with it the worship of Baal, a deity revered in her homeland for controlling rain and fertility, but viewed with deep suspicion in the Yahweh worshipping Israel. The introduction of Baal worship under Jezebel's patronage directly challenged the foundational monotheistic practices of Israel, setting her on a collision course with the existing religious order. Her active role in promoting Phoenician gods was seen not just as a personal belief, but as a political act, an assertion of her influence within the royal court and beyond. This bold move incited the ire of Israelite prophets like Elijah, who saw in Jezebel not just a foreign queen, but a profound threat to the cultural and spiritual identity of Israel. Jezebel's assertiveness in public and state affairs was both groundbreaking and controversial. Her direct involvement in governance, particularly her interactions with nobles and religious leaders, broke conventional norms for royal women of her time. These actions, combined with her unapologetic promotion of her native customs, painted her as a figure of manipulation and moral corruption in the historical and biblical narrative. However, this same tenacity also highlights her capabilities as a leader facing enormous cultural and political pressures in a kingdom far from her birthplace. Upon entering the politically charged environment of Israel, Jezebel swiftly began to establish Baal worship as an integral part of the kingdom's religious practice. This was no mere addition to the existing religious tapestry. It was an assertive campaign meant to reshape Israel's spiritual landscape in alignment with Phoenician beliefs. By introducing Baal, Jezebel not only brought a piece of her homeland into Israel, but also created a new center of power that could rival the existing monotheistic worship of Yahweh. Jezebel's strategic religious influence extended beyond mere advocacy. She actively supported the construction of altars and temples dedicated to Baal and Asherah across Israel, often on a grand scale and in prominent locations. These were not just places of worship, but symbols of her authority and the Phoenician influence on Israeli soil. Through these religious structures, she provided a gathering point for her allies and a focal point for her power, cementing her status among those who might benefit from or sympathize with her cultural and religious heritage. Furthermore, Jezebel appointed and supported a cadre of Baal's priests and prophets, effectively creating a state-sponsored clergy that could promote Phoenician religious practices officially. This was a direct challenge to the prophets of Yahweh, who had previously enjoyed substantial influence under the monotheistic kings of Israel. Her actions were calculated to undermine this existing power structure, replacing it with one more favorable to her and her Phoenician allies. The queen's religious initiatives were deeply intertwined with her political ambitions. By promoting Baal worship, Jezebel was not merely exercising her religious freedom. She was asserting her political will over Israel, challenging the traditional religious authorities, and attempting to realign the kingdom's cultural and religious identity with her own. This bold strategy inevitably led to significant resistance from Yahwistic factions within Israel, setting the stage for the intense cultural and religious conflicts that would define her reign. These confrontations were not just skirmishes over religious doctrine, but battles for cultural supremacy and control of the nation's ideological heart. Jezebel's marriage to King Ahab was not merely a union of two hearts, but a formidable alliance between two powerful realms. As queen, Jezebel's influence extended deep into the administrative and judicial realms of Israel, an influence she wielded with a keen understanding of the political landscape. Her notoriety is perhaps best illustrated in the biblical story of Naboth's vineyard, which encapsulates her approach to governance and manipulation to secure her objectives. Naboth, an Israelite who owned a vineyard adjacent to the royal palace in Jezreel, became a target of King Ahab's desires. When Naboth refused to sell his vineyard, citing the ancestral sanctity of his land, Ahab was disheartened and turned away. However, Jezebel, unwilling to accept this setback and seeing an opportunity to demonstrate her power, devised a plan to obtain the vineyard without direct royal confrontation. Jezebel wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal, thus using the king's authority for her own ends. She cunningly organized a feast and invited Naboth, only to set him up by placing false witnesses who accused him of blasphemy and treason. This led to Naboth's execution, and with no heirs to claim his property, the vineyard reverted to the crown. Through this act, Jezebel not only secured the desired land for Ahab, but also sent a chilling message to anyone who might defy the royal will. This episode highlights Jezebel's ability to navigate and manipulate the legal frameworks of Israel. Her actions were ruthless, but underscored her political acumen and her understanding of the power dynamics at play. She was able to use her position as queen to influence Ahab's decisions and, to some extent, control the judiciary processes within the kingdom. Her interference in legal matters, though it secured short-term gains, also sowed the seeds of long-term instability by undermining the moral and legal foundations of the kingdom. Jezebel's use of her marriage to consolidate power is emblematic of her broader strategy to enforce Phoenician influence and maintain control over Israel's political and cultural institutions. Her actions, while effective in achieving her immediate goals, ultimately contributed to her infamous legacy and the eventual downfall of her dynasty, as they alienated key factions within the kingdom and provoked the ire of those loyal to Yahweh. Jezebel's ascent to power in Israel was marked not only by her bold religious and legal maneuvers, but also by her adeptness in forming alliances that bolstered her position within the kingdom. Understanding the importance of support in a foreign land, she aligned herself with like-minded nobles and officials who shared her cultural background or had interests aligned with Phoenician trade and political goals. These alliances were crucial in maintaining her influence in Israel, providing her with a network of supporters who could implement and defend her policies. Moreover, Jezebel fostered relationships with the Phoenician clergy she brought to Israel, who served as both spiritual and political agents on her behalf. By installing her own religious leaders, she ensured that her cultural and spiritual agenda was promoted throughout the kingdom, further entrenching her power. These priests not only conducted the worship of Baal, but also acted as advisors and enforcers of her will, extending her influence deep into the religious life of the nation. However, Jezebel's assertive actions and foreign religious practices inevitably sparked rivalries, particularly with the prophets of Yahweh, who viewed her as a corrupting influence. The most notable of these prophets was Elijah, who emerged as her staunchest adversary. The ideological battle between Jezebel and Elijah encapsulated the clash between Phoenician and Israelite traditions, with each party representing not just religious, but also political factions within Israel. The rivalry reached its zenith at the contest on Mount Carmel, where Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to demonstrate their God's power against Yahweh. The resulting failure of Baal's prophets and the subsequent slaughter of Jezebel's clergy by Elijah marked a significant defeat for her, dramatically undermining her standing among those who may have been ambivalent or supportive of her until then. This event not only weakened her politically, but also emboldened her opponents, catalyzing resistance against her rule. Despite these setbacks, Jezebel remained a formidable figure, her resilience highlighting her political acumen. Yet, the enmity she garnered, both from the religious factions she suppressed and the traditionalists who opposed her foreign policies, set the stage for her eventual downfall. Her story is one of a ruler who navigated through a maze of power plays, cultural clashes, and political turbulence, leaving a legacy that is as controversial as it is compelling. The initial seeds of Jezebel's downfall were sown long before the actual military and political upheavals that would dethrone her. The discontent among the Israelite populace, fueled by her aggressive promotion of Baal worship and her suppression of Yahweh's prophets, gradually reached a boiling point. Jezebel's foreign religious practices, once merely controversial, became symbols of her alienation from the Israelite core values. The clash was not just religious, but deeply cultural, affecting every layer of society. Elijah's triumph at Mount Carmel marked a significant public shift against Jezebel and her policies. The dramatic failure of Baal's prophets to summon their God and Elijah's subsequent victory were seen not just as a religious, but a divine condemnation of Jezebel's reign. This event emboldened the Yahwistic factions within Israel, uniting them in their opposition against her. The public execution of Baal's prophets, sanctioned by Elijah, was a direct strike against Jezebel's power base, stripping her of her spiritual and temporal authority. Simultaneously, internal royal conflicts began to undermine her influence further. Her son, Ahaziah's rule, followed by Joram, saw diminishing royal control and increased dissatisfaction among the nobles and military leaders. Jezebel's once formidable presence in the court seemed overshadowed by the growing dissent and the clever maneuvering of her political adversaries. Moreover, the prophecies concerning her and her family's downfall, which were widely circulated and believed among the people, added a layer of inevitability to her fate. These prophecies, proclaimed by Elijah and later Elisha, foretold the end of Ahab's dynasty and the violent death that would befall Jezebel. Such divine pronouncements deepened the despair within her circles and galvanized her opponents, who were now convinced that their actions were sanctioned by divine will. The culmination of these factors set the stage for the eventual physical and political assault that would end her reign. The widespread unrest, the prophetic denunciations, and the internal weakening of her dynastic power created a precarious situation. Each of these elements not only preluded her downfall, but also ensured that when the opportunity arose for her adversaries to strike, they had the popular and divine justification to do so. As the political landscape of Israel continued to destabilize, the locus of Jezebel's power, the city of Jezreel, became the center of an imminent military conflict. This strategic city, nestled in the fertile Jezreel Valley and a symbol of the royal family's wealth and agricultural acumen, was soon to witness the unraveling of Jezebel's carefully constructed reign. The siege was led by Jehu, a former military commander who had become the focal point of opposition against Ahab's dynasty. Jehu was not just a skilled warrior, he was a charismatic leader who had been anointed by the prophet Elisha to end the rule of Ahab's family. His rise to power was marked by a fiery chariot ride to Jezreel, determined to execute divine justice as prophesied. The dramatic nature of his rebellion attracted many who were disenchanted with Jezebel's policies and Ahab's legacy. Upon arriving in Jezreel, Jehu executed a series of swift and brutal actions that would seal the fate of Jezebel and her family. His first act was the assassination of King Joram, Jezebel's son and the reigning monarch, an event that took place as Joram went out to meet Jehu, perhaps underestimating his intentions. This assassination marked the beginning of the end for Jezebel's direct influence over Israel. Following Joram's death, Jehu turned his attention to Jezebel herself. As he approached her palace, Jezebel, ever defiant, adorned herself in regal attire and applied makeup, presenting herself at the window to confront Jehu. This act was not just a display of royal dignity, but a calculated attempt to exert her authority and perhaps sway the loyalty of her remaining supporters. However, her presence in the window only incited Jehu's forces further. In a chilling conclusion to the siege, Jezebel was thrown from the window by members of her own court, acting under Jehu's orders. Her fall was symbolic, a literal descent from power that was watched by her own people. Her death was brutal and swift, and Jehu ordered that her body be left in the street, where it was desecrated by dogs, fulfilling the gruesome prophecy made by Elijah. The siege of Jezreel was not just a military victory for Jehu. It was a significant turning point for Israel. It represented the violent, tumultuous rejection of Jezebel's foreign influence and the reassertion of Yahwistic dominance. This event reshaped the political and religious contours of Israel, demonstrating the volatile intersection of prophecy, power, and politics. After the decisive actions at Jezreel, which saw the death of her son King Joram and the symbolic end of her political power, Jezebel faced the inevitable reality of her own demise. The scene of her final confrontation with Jehu is one of the most vivid and dramatic in the biblical narrative, depicting a woman who, despite facing certain death, chose to meet her fate with regal defiance. As Jehu's forces gathered below her palace window, Jezebel took deliberate steps to assert her dignity and perhaps challenge her fate. She adorned herself with her finest makeup and dressed in her royal garments, positioning herself prominently at the palace window. This was not just an act of vanity, but a powerful statement of sovereignty and unbroken spirit. By presenting herself in this manner, Jezebel aimed to confront her accusers not as a defeated queen, but as a monarch in full command of her royal persona. Jezebel's confrontation with Jehu was brief, yet charged with intensity. According to the narrative, she addressed Jehu with taunting words, comparing him to Zimri, another usurper king who met a gruesome end. Her words were sharp, intended to provoke and assert her perception of Jehu as another fleeting claimant to the throne. However, her challenge did not sway Jehu or her fate. Instead, it prompted a swift and brutal response. At Jehu's command, several eunuchs, who were part of her own household, seized the moment to demonstrate their allegiance to the new ruler. They pushed Jezebel from the window, leading to her death from the fall. Her body, lying in the street below, was left unattended as Jehu entered the palace, symbolizing her complete abandonment by those who once served her. This act of violence was not merely a physical elimination of a political rival. It was laden with symbolic undertones meant to signify the total eradication of her influence and the purging of her memory. In a final act of desecration, her body was left to be consumed by stray dogs, fulfilling the gruesome prophecy that Elijah had pronounced years earlier. This stark imagery underscored the harsh, biblical, moral judgment against her actions and legacy. The final confrontation between Jezebel and Jehu marks a pivotal moment in the biblical account of Israel's history. It serves as a dramatic conclusion to the life of a queen who was as reviled as she was formidable. This moment not only encapsulates her dramatic fall from power, but also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of overreaching ambition and the brutal realities of ancient monarchic struggles. The immediate aftermath of Jezebel's death resonated deeply throughout the kingdom of Israel, marking a definitive end to her influence and the dynastic reign of Ahab's family. As Jehu consolidated his control over the kingdom, the repercussions of Jezebel's demise were felt far and wide, both politically and socially. Following her execution, Jehu did not merely stop with the elimination of Jezebel. He pursued a thorough and ruthless campaign to eradicate all remnants of her lineage and anyone associated with Ahab's rule. This purge extended to Jezebel's remaining sons and relatives, ensuring that no potential heir could challenge his authority. The eradication of her bloodline was a clear and brutal strategy to prevent any future claims to the throne from her family, solidifying Jehu's position as king and signaling a new era in Israel's leadership. Moreover, Jehu's actions extended to a religious revolution within the kingdom. He sought to dismantle the infrastructure of Baal worship that Jezebel had so fervently supported. Altars and temples dedicated to Baal were destroyed, and priests associated with the Phoenician deity were killed. This religious purge was aimed not only at erasing Jezebel's spiritual legacy, but also at reaffirming Yahweh worship as the state religion, thus realigning the kingdom's religious identity with its cultural origins. The societal impact of Jezebel's death and the subsequent purge was significant. It served as a stark warning to other foreign influences and underscored the dangers of opposing the prophetic declarations of Yahweh's prophets. Her dramatic and ignoble end was often cited as divine retribution for her sins against Israel and Yahweh, reinforcing the narrative that royal authority should align with divine will as interpreted by the prophets. Public sentiment in the aftermath was likely a mix of relief and horror. Relief at the restoration of traditional religious practices, and horror at the violent methods by which this restoration was achieved. Jezebel's demise became a touchstone for discussions on governance, royal conduct, and the interplay between personal ambition and public duty. Jezebel's death, while marking an end to her direct influence, did not conclude her impact on history or the cultural memory of Israel. Her legacy, laden with controversy and moral lessons, continued to resonate through the ages, influencing both theological interpretations and secular assessments of her life and reign. In religious texts, particularly in the Hebrew Bible, Jezebel is often portrayed as the archetype of wickedness and idolatry, a warning against the dangers of forsaking Yahweh. This portrayal has deeply influenced Judeo-Christian teachings, making her a symbol of the dangers posed by unbridled ambition and the moral decay of foreign influences. Her story is frequently used as a cautionary tale about the consequences of opposing divine will and the catastrophic results of leading others astray from religious orthodoxy. However, Jezebel's legacy extends beyond religious cautionary tales. In modern times, feminist scholars and historians have re-evaluated her story, arguing that her depiction as a purely evil figure may reflect ancient biases against strong, independent women and foreign queens. This perspective considers her actions within the context of her roles as a wife, mother, and ruler in a politically turbulent period. By reassessing her motivations and the challenges she faced, contemporary interpretations often present a more nuanced view of Jezebel, highlighting her political acumen, religious dedication, and her resilience in the face of an inhospitable environment. Furthermore, Jezebel's impact can be seen in popular culture, where her name has become synonymous with certain types of behavior, often pejoratively referring to deceitful and seductive women. This cultural legacy, while oversimplified, underscores how deeply her story has penetrated public consciousness, often serving as a shorthand for discussing themes of power, manipulation, and the vilification of female authority. Jezebel's story also contributes to ongoing discussions about governance, leadership, and the intersections of political and religious authority. Her reign and its dramatic conclusion continue to provoke reflection on the dynamics of power, the role of women in public spheres, and the consequences of cultural and religious integration or conflict.